From this episode, we'll talk about the cult of the dead, Saqqara, the burial place, the place for the step pyramid, will be the most important thing that will introduce to you, but not only the cult of the dead, but major adventure and discoveries.
Five 5,000 years ago, a nation started to build monuments destined to last through the centuries. They drew up a writing system in which they could hand down their thoughts and achievements to future generations. They accomplished tasks in which they could gain hold of eternity. The people of Egypt. The Egyptians show that their sky differs to the others, that their enormous river possesses a nature of a kind unlike other rivers, and even their customs and laws are almost always the opposite to those of the rest of mankind.
Saqqara could be the most important site in Egypt. Because in this site, the kings of Dynasty II were buried here more than 5,000 years ago. But the most important thing about Saqqara is the step pyramid, the oldest pyramid in Egypt. That built by this genius architect, Imhotep, who designed the pyramid of Djoser, the first king of Dynasty III, for the first time from a stone. No place in Egypt can compare with Saqqara. When you come with me and you enter under any pyramid or reveal any discoveries, we reveal magic and mystery. We reveal secrets from the sand.
For thousands of years, the necropolis in Memphis was used as a burial ground for people from every walk of life, from the very poor to nobles and pharaohs. An ideal location, therefore, from which to study the various ways in which one of the most sacred aspects of Egyptian civilization manifests itself: the cult of the dead.
The ancient Egyptians believed in an afterlife, perhaps even more important than their lives on Earth. Conceptions of this afterlife changed over time and according to social status, but in general, it was thought to be, at least in part, an echo of the ideal life on Earth. The ancient Egyptians imagined that their dead could eat, drink, breathe, enjoy their families, and carry out many of the activities that they had considered important during their lives. Several things were considered essential for a successful afterlife. One of these was some sort of tomb, and another was the cult of the dead. Egyptian tombs, whether royal or private, consisted of two principal parts. The burial place was where the body, ideally mummified and protected by coffins and sarcophagi, was stored, along with provisions for the afterlife. Associated with this was an area where the cult of the dead was celebrated. The cult of the dead would have been carried out by the heirs of the deceased, augmented in some cases by a professional priesthood. This cult would have begun with a properly executed funeral and continued, ideally for eternity, with a series of offerings of food and drink, burning of incense, and chanting of prayers. These rituals would have served to sustain the deceased in the afterlife and also to commemorate their lives on Earth, making their names live forever. The Egyptians were practical people and knew that their cults might not be carried out forever. So they created various magical substitutes, such as the scenes and texts we find on the walls of their temples and their chapels.
The Egyptians considered death as the passing from this world to the afterlife. But the journey was a risky one, and there were many obstacles which could prevent the soul of the deceased from reaching the afterlife. During the Old Kingdom, they used a selection of texts, now called pyramid texts, which were inscribed on the walls of the pyramids in order to overcome these dangers. These spells not only guaranteed the pharaoh's ascent to the gods, but also his reunion with Ra, god of the sun. The oldest example of these spells was discovered in 1881 inside the Pyramid of Unas, the last pharaoh of the 5th dynasty, who reigned around 2350 BC. The spells probably already existed in that era, but were only read out during the king's funeral service. It was Unas who decided to inscribe them on the walls of his pyramid. The purpose of this was to show his soul what it needed to do to reach the afterlife safe and sound. During the Middle Kingdom, around 2000 BC, priests decided to actually write these texts on the coffins. From the 18th dynasty onwards, around 1500 BC, they were written down on papyrus scrolls and collected together to form the Book of the Dead. They contained a series of magical and religious spells that would help the soul of the deceased in its journey to the afterlife. But what did the soul find once it arrived in the afterlife? It faced an underworld panel of judges presided over by Osiris, god of the underworld. The fate of the soul in the afterlife was decided here, based on how the deceased had lived his life on earth. The decision was made by means of a scale. If behavior had been immoral and dishonest, the soul was destined to suffer for all eternity. But if life had been irreproachable, the soul would enjoy a happy and eternal continuation of earthly life.
Burials of common people have been found at Saqqara, but these date to the later periods of Egyptian history and are mainly just bodies, sometimes in coffins or cartonnage or wrapped in reed mats in pits in the sand. Most of the tombs visible here, such as the one in which I'm standing now, belong to the elite, members of the nobility, officials in the royal administration, leaders of armies and expeditions, and priests. But dominating the site are 16 royal kings' pyramids. The most important of these, the first pyramid, the first example of monumental stone architecture in the world, is the Step Pyramid of Djoser.
What do we know today about Pharaoh Djoser? In actual fact, very little. Very little information is known about this king, who reigned between 2680 and 2650 BC. His name, however, has been passed down through the centuries thanks to his tomb, the Step Pyramid. With its imposing size and 60-meter-high structure, this masterpiece has dominated the view of the Saqqara necropolis for 4,700 years. The pyramid's external shape makes it immediately recognizable and has helped to make it one of the most famous ancient Egyptian landmarks.
In the beginning, the tomb, which was just a pit, was dug in the ground. And after this, pharaohs found out that rains go through the body. Wild animals attack the body. So they start to cover this pit with some wood to protect it. And after this, they get idea to develop the tomb from just a pit. So they start to build two buildings, superstructure above the ground and substructure under the ground. And after this, the architect immediately covered the main shaft, the pit, with cedar wood beams. And he built above it. He built a superstructure. He built mastaba. He built the first step, okay? And he did some additions to the sides. And he built the second step, third step, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, to get a step pyramid. The question now, why? It was a step pyramid for the soul to climb the pyramid, to go to the heaven, to unify with the sun god, Ra.
The inside of the structure is worthy of a lot more attention than it has so far received. The passageways run for kilometers underneath the pyramid. For centuries, these were used to deter robbers who risked getting lost in the tunnels. Many were seduced by the promise of riches, and after going inside, could not find their way out again. Few people are now able to enjoy the sight of these intricate underground passageways.
No one can believe that we are under the oldest pyramid in Egypt. Once the king lived here. You know, when I come to this place, I really want to say one thing. I want all of us who are listening to me now to remember this man, Imhotep, this genius man who invented the first ceiling made of limestone, who invented the first pillar. And he prepared this pyramid for His Majesty Zoser to be the burial place, to be a place for him to live for eternity. This is really the quest of immortality.
Restoration work is now mainly concentrated on the pharaoh's burial chamber, which was damaged when part of the ceiling collapsed. As well as covering the entire floor, the fallen beams and large blocks of stone broke Djoser's magnificent sarcophagus into several fragments. Despite the damage, this sarcophagus still provides a precious testimony to the technical and engineering skills of the ancient Egyptians.
People wonder all the time how the Egyptians were able to bring a huge lid like this, a huge sarcophagus like this that weighs more than 20 tons. And they bring it to this burial chamber. I can explain it to you. You will not believe it. They fill all this place with sand. And they bring the sarcophagus from that tunnel and they put it above the sand. And they take the sand from down and the sarcophagus will come down. This is to show how those Egyptians, the great people, were really thinking, using their mind more than using their muscles.
Traveling along the many kilometers of passageways under the Pyramid of Steps, other chambers can be reached, some of which were of great ritualistic importance.
One of the most amazing things that underneath this pyramid found thousands of stone vessels and pottery vessels everywhere. This is the offering room that with you now we can smell the past of mystery and magic.
What was discovered 30 meters below ground level has once again confirmed the unique position that the Pyramid of Djoser holds within the ancient Egyptian cultural scenario.
The pyramid was the tomb for the king, and the burial chamber was like the bedroom in his palace, because the pyramid was a symbolic palace. If you go at Giza pyramids, at Abu Sir, Saqqara, everywhere, you only know that queens were buried in small pyramids around the king. We call them subsidiary pyramids or pyramids of queens. But Zoser was the only king who gave permissions to be buried beside him. And he made for them beautiful sarcophagus made of alabaster. The queens of Zoser were very near to his heart. I do feel that Zoser gave permission to the genius architect Imhotep to be buried with him in this unique pyramid.
Imhotep was without doubt an ingenious architect and is believed to have been the first person to build using stone. Thanks to his insight, men started using more solid and durable materials, and as techniques evolved, they learnt to build bigger, taller, and more imposing constructions. The few representations of Imhotep that have been passed down to us conjure up the image of a small but ingenious man. But he was also the founder of Egyptian medicine, and it is this that has possibly earned him his place in history throughout the centuries. Unfortunately, the tomb of Imhotep has never been found. Does this tomb still exist? And what secrets might it be hiding?
We archaeologists, all of us, are searching around the pyramid, inside the pyramid. One day, maybe the secrets of the sand will reveal something about this architect. This will be the great discovery of the 21st century.
An enigma surrounds both the steppe period of Djoser and the Great Pyramids of Giza, the lack of hieroglyphics. The generally accepted explanation is also the simplest. These are the most ancient pyramids of all, and at the time they were built, it was still not common practice to leave any writings inside. This could have made it difficult to assign the pyramids to their legitimate owners. So how can the archaeologists be so certain that the pyramid belonged to Djoser?
Archaeologists found a great discovery for us. They found a banner inscribed by hieroglyphs. We found the name of the king Zoser. Zoser? But in ancient time, his name wasn't Zoser. He was called Neterghet. Neterghet means a divine body. But in the New Kingdom, he was called Zoser.
The Pyramid of Djoser is the largest and most ancient of all the royal burial complexes in the ancient necropolis of Memphis. But it is not the only one. There are also several pyramids at the Saqqara site, all in various states of preservation. But each one has a story to tell. In many cases, the story is still waiting to be told.
I'm taking you to another adventure, going inside one of the most amazing pyramids. Very few cameras who entered inside. The pyramid is amazing, and the stories about the discovery is so unique that I will take you with me to see this pyramid of Sekhem-Khet, the last king of Dynasty 3.
Today, nothing remains of the upper part of the pyramid of Sekhem-Khet, and it is only down to luck that it was discovered by Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass in 1954. This discovery made him extremely famous and caused jealousy among those that had not succeeded in a similar feat. He was therefore wrongly accused of stealing antiquities. The humiliation of being repeatedly interrogated by the police distressed him so much that he actually committed suicide. He was later found to be innocent.
When Zahi Hawass, this great Egyptian, found the burial chamber, he came here and found this sarcophagus is completely sealed, intact. No one opened it before. It's made of alabaster. Then the press came here. Hundreds of people came around the sarcophagus. And even Nasser, President Nasser, in that time came in front of all the press. They opened the sarcophagus and they found nothing. Amazing story to show how archaeologists can be lucky and how many of them can be unlucky.
There are also some pyramids at Saqqara that were reserved for the queens. These were mostly the ones who had been honored for being chosen as the pharaoh's favorite wife.
This site can prove that we found at Saqqara only 30% of our monuments. We knew that this pyramid behind me is the pyramid of Queen Khwit, but no one ever excavated this pyramid. We were able to discover this pyramid. Khwit was the wife of King Titi, the first king of Dynasty 6. People always discover statues or tombs, but to discover a pyramid, it's amazing. This is one of the most exciting moments in my life. There is no camera ever entered this place. This is the first time for you to learn about thrill and exciting in archaeology. That's really the thrill. How do we learn from taking the sand away? When we entered in the burial chamber, and I saw this big, large granite sarcophagus. It's amazing. Inside, we found remains of a skeleton that I thought that this could be the skeleton of Queen Khwit, the main wife of King Titi, the first king of Dynasty 6.
The sands of the desert hide things well. It is down to the skills of archaeologists to discover that which otherwise would be lost forever. It is these skills that led to the discovery of the so-called Headless Pyramid, which was found in the northern part of Saqqara. Just like the Pyramid of Sekhemkhet, nothing more remains of its upper part.
From looking at the size of the limestone that the Egyptian used to construct this pyramid, and even looking at the big, huge granite blocks, we can say that this pyramid belonged to Dynasty 5 about 4,400 years ago. This is the most recent discovery happened in Egypt, and I called it the Headless Pyramid.
Many tombs in Saqqara are still with us today. In addition to the pyramids, which were specifically built for the pharaohs, the most interesting tombs were those that belonged to the people who had worked directly for the king and were, when they died, therefore guaranteed treatment worthy of the rich and famous. Also of interest is the tomb of the pharaoh's two beauticians. Nyank Khnum is on the left and Khnum Hotep on the right. The tomb was discovered in 1964, and since then a lot has been said about the picture of these two men. Some people believe them to be very close brothers who had chosen to be depicted in this intimate pose. But it was actually this pose that led to speculation that they were actually a homosexual couple. However, this theory is scorned upon by many Egyptologists. So, who actually were these two men? The hieroglyphics and the scenes depicted in the tomb show that they were colleagues. They were, more specifically, Pharaoh Nusere's beauticians. He was one of the kings of the 5th dynasty and reigned about 2450 BC. Looking after the king's appearance was a very important job, and so they were very highly rewarded. The same can be said about another tomb discovered in 1964, that of Erupkapta, a butcher who, like the beauticians, served Pharaoh Nusere. Although he wouldn't have had the same privileges, he probably earned a lot more money. His tomb was dug into the rock and would have taken 10 years of uninterrupted work to complete, and would have required significant financial resources. A mystery surrounds this tomb. An incomplete bas-relief and only partly finished walls prove that the tomb was never completed. Could the butcher have died prematurely before he could finish his tomb? Royal dentists were also among the privileged elite group of workers. Their tombs have only recently been discovered thanks to the work of some robbers. They failed in their search for treasures, and the archaeologists were able to bring to light the tombs of Imri and Kammisu. Pharaoh Usakaf was the first king of the 5th dynasty who reigned in about 2500 BC, and it was their job to take care of his teeth. Their tombs were made of mud bricks and were not meant to last forever, unlike those in stone. To guarantee that their bodies remained safe, they resorted to the most obvious solution: a curse. The inscription on one of the tomb doors is clear.
Whoever violates the sacredness of this place will be eaten by a crocodile.
Unfortunately, the threat didn't have the desired effect, but it shows us that they all resorted to curses in order to protect their eternal resting place. From humble dentists to pharaohs.
Death shall rapidly descend on those who dare to disrupt the pharaoh's sleep.
This threatening sentence was inscribed on Tutankhamun's tomb, which was discovered in 1922 by English archaeologist Howard Carter. Funded by the rich English nobleman Lord George Edward Carnarvon, Carter had been excavating in the Valley of the Kings for 10 years. But shortly before abandoning the search forever, he found the entrance to the tomb. Treasures were found in the tomb, the like of which had never been seen before. There were more than 5,000 antiquities crammed into a few square meters. Most of it was pure gold, and all of it priceless. It was the archaeological discovery of the century. The news soon traveled around the world, but what held the public's interest more than anything else was the curse of Tutankhamun. With the death of Lord Carnarvon only a year after the discovery of the tomb, belief in the curse took hold. In truth, very few fell victim to this alleged curse. Howard Carter died in 1939, 17 years after the discovery. Tutankhamun's anger should have been directed at Carter more than anyone else. If the curse had really existed, Carter should have been the first one to be struck down. Yet what seems to be just superstition does actually hold an element of truth, and a scientific explanation too.
Do you believe in curse? Well, it's a long story. I'm gonna tell you about it. You know, in ancient times, pharaohs were using some materials for mummification. By time, those materials poisoned the air of the tomb. So when the people discover a tomb, or archaeologists discover a tomb, they open, the burial chamber and go through the burial chamber. They smelt this poison air, so they get cancer or they died. If I'm shaving my beard and we found a tomb, I cannot go inside the tomb because the skin, it will be open. So maybe I got bad, microbes or, a disease or something like this. But nowadays, when we found a tomb, what we're gonna do? We open the burial chamber and I think a candle. If the light of the candle is off, it means the chamber are poisoned. So I have to leave it open for 4 or 3 hours to refresh the air. So this is not connected by curse. It's connected by archaeology, by adventure in archaeology.
The purpose of these curses was to protect the deceased, starting with their burial. The tombs were destined to house the bodies of the deceased for all eternity. This was why they were built of stone, unlike houses which were built of mud bricks. But body preservation was also of vital importance, as the Egyptians were convinced that without it, they would not be able to live forever in the afterlife. So, they perfected a fascinating technique which in some ways still remains a mystery: mummification. The ritual followed by the priests was very rigorous. They made an incision in the abdomen and removed the internal organs. Lungs, liver, stomach and intestines were removed and preserved in canopic jars.
They leave the heart inside because the heart was the place of knowledge.
After washing the body with palm wine, the priests inserted natron, a natural salt, silt, sawdust and mud from the Nile, into the abdomen. Then they would smear the body with aromatic oils and completely cover it with natron. This led to the complete dehydration of the body, which was then wrapped in several strips of linen bandages. The whole mummification process took 70 days. It was always believed that the brain was removed from the skull through the nose using long metal hooks. A recent discovery has shown that this wasn't always the case.
The CT scan of the mummies that I did at the Cairo Museum, on my search for Queen Hatshepsut, I found they leave the brain inside.
The ancient Egyptians' cult of the dead also manifested itself through their religious respect for certain animals. They were treated as equals to the pharaohs and gods, both in life and death.
The ancient Egyptians thought that many animals were sacred, and they were all associated with different gods. So cows and bulls were sacred, you have crocodiles that are sacred, and even things that are very small, like scarab beetles, are sacred animals for the ancient Egyptians. The Egyptians considered certain animals more sacred than others because they were associated with important gods. So they would take the important aspects of a particular animal and tie it in with a divinity. So you have, for example, the sun god, Re. He was associated with all kinds of eagles or hawks because they, of course, fly up very high in the sky, are very powerful, and the color of their feathers is a lot like a hawk as well, and the sun, so that sort of ties in together. There are some animals, of course, who are mummified in a way that is very different to that of humans, and those are primarily birds, because we have thousands and thousands of votive ibis mummies, and also many, many hawk mummies. And these are not made by the usual way of mummification, but instead they would take the bird and dip it into a vat of boiling resin or pitch or bitumen, and then just take this and wrap it up, and that would be its mummification. With animal mummies, you have sacred animals who are supposed to have had the spirit of a god in their bodies when they lived, and when they die, the spirit of the god moves on to the body of a different animal of the same species. And these animals were very carefully treated and mummified because they were supposed to be divines on earth. And then, of course, they were buried. And they were buried in grand ways because they have huge stone sarcophagi. And then they're buried in these catacombs where you have passageways lined with
chambers which contain the sarcophagi and sometimes grave goods. So things like the Serapeum at Saqqara or the sacred animal necropolis, which tunnels for several kilometers under the Saqqara plateau. You have these underground tunnels which are full with animal mummies.
The Serapeum in Memphis is the cemetery of the sacred Apis bull, which was believed to be the living manifestation of the god Ptah, creator of the world. In 1850, Auguste Mariette was sent to Egypt by the Louvre Museum. During a visit to Saqqara, he noticed the head of a sphinx jutting out of the sand and linked it to others seen in Alexandria and Cairo. And suddenly, he just knew. He had found the Sphinx-lined avenue. It was 8 kilometers long and used by the priests to take the mummified body of Apis from the Temple of Mummification in Memphis to the Serapeum. Because of problems with funding and red tape, a year passed before Mariette could enter the Serapeum. He silently inspected the chambers by torchlight, followed behind by his assistants, and came across 24 huge sarcophagi. He realized that they had all been desecrated and emptied of their treasures and mummies, except for 2. In order to open them, he took drastic measures, dynamite. The 2 coffins were damaged, but Mariette achieved his aim. Through the opening created by the explosion, he could see what they contained, jewels and ornaments. Building work for the Serapeum began around 1400 BC, during the reign of Amenhotep II, a king of the 18th dynasty. We can tell that the complex was suddenly abandoned when the Romans conquered Egypt in 31 BC by the fact that an unfinished coffin was left abandoned in one of the galleries. God Apis had fallen into decline. New gods were to take his place. The ancient Egyptians were firmly convinced that there was an afterlife. The monuments, the texts, the tombs, and the entire cultural heritage they left behind help us to understand how important an eternal existence in the afterlife was to them. But they have given us very few indications of how they perceived their earthly lives.
We are maybe, in my opinion, one of the most important sites in Egypt, the center for the worship of the sun god. This place called now Heliopolis. The Greek called it Heliopolis, meaning the city of the sun. It was called by the ancient Egyptian Un, and it was connected with the 13 Nome of Lower Egypt. No one really can believe we're only 20 kilometers away from downtown Cairo. And we can see this important town that I will tell you the story of this town. The story that this is the place that all of us thought about creation. All of us can hear from this place the world was created. From this place we can have lots of knowledge about antiquities, about salvage archaeology. And today we are going to do another adventure in archaeology.
Scholars and scientists carried out their work in Heliopolis for many centuries. Their studies led to important scientific and cultural developments. This work greatly depended on people's knowledge of the laws of nature and the world they lived in. With time, a number of cults were born, including the cult of the sun. A magnificent temple was built in Heliopolis, which was dedicated solely to the cult of the sun. Unfortunately, nothing now remains of this building. However, we can get a good idea of what it was like by observing the Sun Temple in Abu Ghurab, which is located close to Abu Zir and not far from Cairo. Not much remains of this temple, based on the exact same model as Heliopolis and built under Nusere's rule, one of the pharaohs from the 5th dynasty. However, it is the only one anywhere in Egypt of which any trace still remains.
The cult of the sun existed even in pre-dynastic period, more than 6,000 years ago. And the first temple that was established for the sun was in Dynasty 1, about 5,000 years ago. And we are actually in a place that contains many temples located in the area and dedicated to the Ramesside period. Many Ramses the second and the third and the fourth and the 11th, they built temples here. This place, the priestess even divided the year to 12 months. Every month is 30 days. Every year is 365 days. In my opinion, Heliopolis built Egypt.
The ancient Egyptians didn't know what the sun was exactly. However, they sensed that it was the source of life itself. This is why they venerated every one of its manifestations. And the god of the sun, Ra, was always the main divinity in their pantheon. He was the god of rebirth and was depicted in many ways. At dawn, he was Khepri, shaped like a beetle. During the day, he was Ra, portrayed as a man with a falcon's head crowned by a sun disk. Finally, at sunset, he was Atum, human in shape with a double crown on his head. However, the ancient Egyptians didn't just study the sun. They knew exactly where the cardinal compass points were, for example. Khufu's pyramid is a perfect example. The 4 sides of the monument are closely aligned to the 4 cardinal compass points, with an error of less than 1/10 of a degree. The Paris Observatory was built in the 1800s, and the aim was to align it to the cardinal points. However, its deviation is twice that of the Great Pyramid. Even though the tools they used were very limited, the ancient Egyptians already knew about the existence of 5 planets in our solar system: Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, Mercury, and Venus. They were also able to distinguish between a number of constellations: Cygnus, Ursa Major, Cassiopeia, Sirius, and above all, Orion. We have been able to ascertain an outstanding correspondence between the position of the stars that form Orion's belt and the 3 great pyramids of Giza. It would seem that other pyramids actually correspond to other stars in the constellation. Just a coincidence? Or part of a message that the ancient Egyptians wanted to pass down? Over the centuries and dynasties, the cult of the sun became increasingly important, reaching its climax during the reign of one of the most controversial pharaohs in Egyptian history, Akhenaten. Akhenaten abolished the cult of the gods in favor of a single god, Aton, bringing about a complete religious and social revolution. Aton, the sole god and king, substituted the Theban sun theology, which worshipped Amun. The sun, first represented as a man with a falcon's head, was now identified by a disk. Rays shine out from this bright sphere, ending in stretched-out hands that carry Ankh, the key to life, to mankind, and to all creation. But who was Akhenaten? And why has this figure been the source of so many contradictions over the centuries?
It is fascinating to speculate about Akhenaten's personality. Was he a genius? Was he a madman? Was he a little of both? We don't really know, but he certainly was an innovator. His religion And his art, as it reflects his religion, was certainly very original. Especially from the early part of his reign, Akhenaten and his family are shown in a very unusual way. They have very elongated faces, overlarge jaws, swollen bellies, and spindly limbs. They look very strange to us. There's been a great deal of discussion about what these features mean. Are they a reflection of what Akhenaten really looked like? Do they perhaps reflect a congenital deformity of some sort?
What drove Akhenaten to overturn the balance of a system? Was it a power struggle between religious castes or a visionary's plan?
There was a real conflict between the king and the government body, government officials and the priesthood of Ammon, clearly speaking. Over this situation, there was an exaltation of royal authority through the valorization of its divine appearances.
The beautiful and powerful Nefertiti took on a prominent role during the reign of her husband Akhenaten. Her presence in official ceremonies, even in military ones, made way for suspicions that her role was as co-ruler. But surrounding this figure, there are many doubts, the foremost of which is connected with her disappearance.
It seems more likely that she died because there's no evidence to state disgrace. On the other side, some scholars believe that Saqqara, a pharaoh ruling between Akhenaten and Tutankhamun, was Nefertiti herself, assuming a male character as Queen Hatshepsut. She or he ruled along a brief period after the death of Akhenaten, with Meritaten in official and ceremonial role of a great royal wife.
Even though the pharaohs did not, unlike Akhenaten, make drastic or unpopular decisions, they were a very important part of ancient Egyptian religion.
The pharaoh was the link between the human and the divine realms. As son of the sun god, he was the incarnation of God on earth. All communication between gods and men ultimately flowed through him.
The religious importance of Heliopolis is linked to how the gods were actually created. The priests of the city, who were without a doubt the most important members of society, created the legend that the main divinities were born in the city of the sun itself. This is how the so-called Heliopolitan Ennead was born, consisting of the 9 divinities who, according to local theories of cosmogony, created the world.
The pharaonic civilization that we know about started from this place. The devil god in here made a party, and he made a beautiful sarcophagus, invited Osiris, and Osiris sit in the sarcophagus, he closed it and put it in the ocean. This coffin became the pillar in the palace of the king of Byblus in Lebanon. Isis cried for her son and husband. From her tears made the river Nile. And she went to Byblus. She took the pillar. With her magic, she returned Osiris to life. And she made love to him. And she had the Osiris, the son.
Horus was born from the union between Isis and Osiris. The god with the falcon's head was conceived and brought up by Isis with the sole objective of avenging Osiris. When Horus became adult, he attacked Set, who reacted by pulling out one of his eyes. At the end of a cruel battle, Horus was the winner. His eye was recuperated by the god Thoth, who purified it and replaced it in the socket. The Egyptian religion attributes a lot of magic power to Horus's eye, as for example that of protection from disease and of bringing man back to life. In the mummification rites, Horus's eye was placed above the incision where the embalmers had taken out the internal organs. The priests of Heliopolis believed that Horus, the god of the sky, could not be deemed first among the gods without Ra, god of the sun, and so they identified one with the other. They decided that the sun eye, right, belonged to Ra, and the moon eye, left, belonged to Horus.
Although Horus is destined to become a king, the court of Heliopolis doesn't trust him. He is a very, very young god. Only after lots of trials, Horus will reach what he deserves de jure, thanks to the magical arts of his mom, Isis, and the power of his father, Osiris. In fact, Osiris threatens the other gods with frightful disgraces in case they wouldn't allow his son Horus to become a king.
One monument linked to the cult of the sun has over the centuries become the symbol of ancient Egyptian civilization, the obelisk. Symbol of the god of the sun, Ra. At the time of Akhenaten's religious reform, it was believed to be a ray of sun that had been turned to stone.
The word obelisk comes from the Greek and is certainly not an Egyptian word, as it was called ben or teken in Egyptian and means small skewer. It is without a doubt the name given to this impressive monument by the Greeks and Romans, who satirically and humorously likened it to a small skewer on which the Egyptians roasted meat for their gods.
Amongst the few remains of ancient Heliopolis, there is also an obelisk erected by Senusret I, second pharaoh of the 12th dynasty. The monument was erected around 1940 BC. At just over 20 meters in height, it is not particularly imposing. However, it has one feature that makes it unique. It is the most ancient obelisk in the world. But how were the obelisks built? Many theories have been advanced on the techniques used. The discovery of the great unfinished obelisk in Aswan proved to be a great help. The block, measuring 42 meters by 4, would have been, if completed, the largest obelisk in the world. It was never completed due to fractures that occurred when it was removed from the rocks around it. In order to extract the block, the ancient Egyptians got rid of the outermost rocks by heating them up and then cooling them down with water. Once they reached the compact vein, they dug lateral trenches. The block was now ready to be removed. Lifting an obelisk was a very complex feat, especially as there was always the risk of it breaking in half. The first step was to place a granite pedestal on the ground. 2 banks were built next to it, which created a sort of funnel. The area between the banks was filled with sand. The obelisk was at this point brought to the bank and placed on the sand, which was then gradually removed. As the sand was taken away, the obelisk was lowered and left to rest on the pedestal. Once it was upright, the banks were removed. The work was over. The obelisk was now standing.
I'm especially pleased to be able to say these few words about Heliopolis and its symbols, while having the obelisk of the Garden of Boboli in Florence behind me. It wasn't found in Florence, of course, but in Rome. The obelisk was bought by a member of the Medici family and placed in the Medici's Roman villa, which now houses the French Academy. And there it stayed until the Medicis, on leaving Rome, brought this important monument with them and erected it in the gardens of Boboli. The date of this obelisk, the date of its construction, dates back to the reign of Ramses II, whose name and epithets are written at the top of the obelisk, where he is regularly called loved by the god Atum, Lord of Heliopolis. So we can therefore have no doubts about its origin.
Other obelisks also originated from Heliopolis. Two twin obelisks, erected by Thutmose III, ruler from the 18th dynasty and known as Cleopatra's Needles, have since been separated. One has been on the Victoria Embankment in London since 1819, while the other was erected in Central Park in New York in 1881. Another two obelisks, originally erected in front of the Temple of the Sun, can now be found in Rome. Obelisk Flaminio in Piazza del Popolo, built under the reigns of Ramses II and his son Meremptah, and one called the Solar Obelisk in Piazza Montecitorio by Psammetichus II, pharaoh from the 26th dynasty. Although these monuments are typical of Egypt, it is Rome that actually has the most obelisks, as many as 13, removed during the wars. It was mainly Roman emperors and popes who wanted them in the Eternal City as a symbol of their power. There are only 8 left in Egypt, mainly in Luxor and Karnak. The sun was such an important part of ancient Egyptian culture that it was linked to many different aspects of nature. Ra, in its earthly manifestations, was reincarnated in many animals. The most important of them was the phoenix.
The phoenix, which in Heliopolis accompanied the cult of the sun, represented resurrection. It is in some way equivalent to the god Osiris, who promised resurrection after death.
Sometimes Heliopolis would be visited by the phoenix, its sacred bird, which would land on the Benben stone, shaped as a pyramid, venerated in the Temple of the Phoenix since the very earliest dynasties. It would seem that it was actually its shape that inspired the pyramids and the obelisk's pointed tip. This stone was so sacred and its religious importance so great that the priests of Heliopolis brought it close to the hill created by Nun, the primordial ocean, and on which Atum, the creator of the universe, gave life to the other divinities of the Ennead. The origin of the stone remains a mystery. According to some legends, the original stone was a meteorite fallen to Earth. Is this a fabrication aimed at attaching a holy aspect to this legend, or a real story? Heliopolis had already reached the epitome of its glory more than 4,500 years ago, during the Old Kingdom. But what did visitors see when entering for the first time?
It is a place of intelligence, the first university of Earth.
Society was rigidly structured. The priests were in charge and had almost unlimited powers.
In addition to carrying out the cult, the priests of Heliopolis were astronomers, responsible for tracking the movements of the celestial bodies and keeping the festival calendar. The high priest of Heliopolis would have been a member of the high elite, highly esteemed for his skills and responsibilities.
Many temples dedicated to the divinities were built in Heliopolis. This is why the city must have grown so big. The great quality of the few monuments that have survived also provide us with the image of an extraordinarily beautiful city. A kilometre from the obelisk of Senusret I, we find a column found amongst the houses in 1980. The inscriptions and hieroglyphics on the shaft provide us with important information. The column belonged to a temple erected by Meremptah, successor of Ramses II. On it, there are a series of numbers showing how many foreigners there were at the time of the pharaoh's reign. The scenes, which some experts believe represent the Jews fleeing from Egypt, are also of great interest. Little over a year ago, and even here by accident, the remains of a temple complex were discovered, which according to experts was as big as the one in Luxor and Karnak, and just as important.
the most amazing thing that we found first evidence of a temple dated to the reign of Akhenaten. The name of Akhenaten written in hieroglyphic, and also his beautiful wife, Nefertiti. Her name was written. And a piece of a stone, we call it talatat. And talatat in Arabic means 3. And this is the style of the blocks of the construction of the temple of Akhenaten. And this can prove that Akhenaten did not only build temples in Amarna, as many people thought before, but he built temples everywhere. One of the most important area, he built his temple on the area of the spot of the sun god. He wanted to show that Aton, the god behind the sun, is the most important one. The second temple that built here was actually of Ramses II. And this is the large temple that we found, mainly the plan of the temple, and we found this beautiful seated statue that has a cartouche of Ramses II, and in the top you can see the leopard skin to show that Ramses II built this temple for him as a high priest for the worship of the sun god.
Homage to you when you rise on your horizon as Ra, resting on truth. You sail over heaven, and every face sees you as you travel, hidden from their faces. You show yourself in the morning and in the evening, every day.
It's not difficult to make surprising discoveries in the suburbs of Cairo, as is the case with one of the most beautiful tombs discovered in recent years, which was uncovered totally by accident.
It belonged to a person, his name is Banahsi, and this person was Nubian, because you know, the Nubian ruled Egypt in dynasty 25, one dynasty before the period of this tomb, because this tomb is dated to dynasty 26, in the reign of a king called Pismatic, and his name is written hieroglyphic as Nefer Ibra. And this tomb, it's small, but it has part of the Book of the Dead. The book can explain the trip to the afterlife. We can see in many scenes here, Khipr, the beetle, inside the sun disk, representing the sun god, and led by Banahsi and the god Thoth and the god Rahurakhti in a boat. They go for the quest of immortality. But the most beautiful place and the most beautiful scene is the scene on the ceiling of the goddess Nut, the goddess of the sky. She's holding the sky on her hand. Every piece of inscription, the color, the hieroglyphic, it tells us the story of the quest of immortality.
Nut is the Egyptian goddess of birth, and she who greets the dead. Sister of Geb, god of the earth, Nut is the goddess of the sky. The Egyptians depict her in an arched position above her husband, separated from him by the void, Shu. She is the mother of all the stars, and according to myth, she gives birth to them every evening, to then eat them up the next morning. The position the goddess takes symbolizes her power over the sun and the moon. She is often represented in the same way over sarcophagi, which in turn symbolize the belly of Nut. The deceased was supposed to pass through Nut's body to be born again. An ancient city, one of the biggest and most important in the whole of Egyptian history, is now totally hidden under the uncontrolled expansion of Cairo's suburbs. This makes it very difficult to excavate in the search for any treasures that the ground still holds.
You know, this is the most difficult excavation that anyone can do. We call it salvage archaeology. Just recently, we discovered a tomb under a house. We need to take the tomb out. We do not want to destroy the house. We have to save the people here. Look, beside this temple, there is 5 or 6 floors, buildings. Then underneath all these houses, there is many treasures hidden underneath. We have to save the treasures, but also we have to save the people. This is the most difficult excavation, but the most exciting one, because you reveal every day evidence to reconstruct history from the same area, the center of the sun god, Ra.
A mystery lasting more than 3,200 years, thanks to the courage and intuition of one man, became the greatest archaeological discovery of the century. A forgotten pharaoh took his rightful place in history. The boy king, Tutankhamun.
The discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun was the most important discovery ever happened in history. The discovery happened on November 4th, 1922, when Howard Carter was excavating in the valley and the water boy found the entrance, and Howard Carter came, looked at the entrance, and he found the tomb that he was searching for 5 years.
On the 4th of November 1922, the English archaeologist Howard Carter unearthed the 16 steps of the stairway which led to Tutankhamun's tomb. The tomb was intact. Nobody had yet violated it. But only 22 days later did Carter realize the importance of his discovery.
The 26th of November was the crucial day, the best day of my life, such that I could never hope to live another one like it. Halfway through the afternoon, about 10 meters after the first door, a second one was discovered. The seal markings here were less clear, but Tutankhamun's seal and that of the royal necropolis were still distinguishable. Soon all would be clarified. It was sufficient to break down the walled door to find the answers to all our questions. Gradually, with what seemed to us to be exasperatingly slow, all the rubble covering the lower part of the door was cleared away, and finally the ceiling wall became entirely visible. This was the decisive moment.
Facing this wall, perhaps Howard Carter didn't even imagine to be one step away from the archaeological discovery of the 20th century, an event that would have made his name immortal, together with that of the pharaoh whom he was about to bring to light, Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun, up to that moment, a name forgotten over the centuries, a pharaoh who did not live long enough to leave a tangible sign of his earthly life, a pharaoh whose name did not even appear in the royal lists of the dynasties of ancient Egypt. Such lists, in fact, were interrupted from Amenhotep III until Horemheb, omitting the names of 4 sovereigns, the so-called heretic pharaohs, Akhenaten, Saqqara, and of course Tutankhamun.
Tutankhamun was one of the kings of the 18th dynasty, and he was the youngest king. He died with the age of 18 or 19, and it became a kind of a secret or a mystery. How did he die?
The boy pharaoh lived and reigned in one of the most controversial periods of Egyptian history. He became king shortly after the death of Akhenaten, the sovereign who carried out a social, political and religious revolution without precedent. The Egyptian pantheon was replaced by a unique god, Aten, the sun, for whom Akhenaten had an entire city constructed, Tel El Amarna, and closed all the temples dedicated to all the other gods. Upon the death of this pharaoh, a turbulent period followed, during which the priests of Amun, the primordial god, succeeded in bringing the situation back to normal.
Tutankhamun brought the religious center of the country back to Karnak, and many of the work that Akhenaten had done to change to the worship of the Aten and to proscribe the worship of Amun-Re was undone. The religious center moved back here. Amun-Re became the most important god again. Akhenaten's temples were dismantled and again reused in other monuments. What's nice about that is that they've been preserved, unfortunately, in fragments.
In the year 1339 BC, with the support of the same priests, Tutankhamun became pharaoh when he was only 9 years old. Before the discovery of his tomb, named as KV62, very little was known about the young king. Today, instead, he is known much more than any other pharaoh of ancient Egypt. Yet there are some aspects of his life that still remain shrouded in mystery, such as the identity of his parents.
If you look at the family of Tutankhamun, actually, as I said before, there is some scholars believe that his father was Amenhotep III. I really do believe that his father was Akhenaten. His mother, I believe she was Kia, but some people still believe it could be Nefertiti. We really do not know.
Even without existing archaeological evidence that provides definite answers on the ancestry of Tutankhamun, it seems anyway certain that he was born and lived his early life at Tel El Amarna. This hypothesis is suggested by several facts. In the first place, his name during the first years of his life was Tutankhaten, that is, the living image of Aten. The royal tomb of Amarna, as well, has a wall with the representation of the funeral of Mekhetaten, one of the daughters of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. According to one theory, Mekhetaten died in childbirth, giving birth, in fact, to Tutankhaten, represented as a baby in the arms of a foster mother. According to some experts, however, the boy pharaoh was the son-in-law of Akhenaten because he married one of the daughters of the heretic pharaoh and Nefertiti. However, there is another theory that seems the most probable.
We think that he was the son of Akhenaten. Let's say 90%. All the evidence we have can tell us that he was one of the children of Akhenaten. We know that Akhenaten had only 6 daughters from the very famous queen Nefertiti, and he didn't have any son from Nefertiti. That's why he had a secondary wife. Her name was Kia, and Kia bore that son for Akhenaten.
The young Tutankhaten, it seemed, married his stepsister. The only certainty is that the boy was crowned at Tel El Amarna, but quickly abandoned that city to return to Thebes, where he changed his name to Tutankhamun, the living image of Amun.
Tutankhamun's occupation of the city must have been quite short. No changes to the names in the temples were made to record his presence, and the highest year date on any document we have from here, they're mainly jar labels, is to a year 2. And the next thing we know is that Tutankhamun is at Memphis issuing a decree which rejects, by implication, all that Akhenaten has stood for, all that he has done, and is restoring the temples. And in that decree, one knows that the Amarna period is over. And it must be just a very small number of years between Akhenaten's death and this formal rejection by Tutankhamun. That is the interval that represents the end of the Amarna period, maybe no more than 3 or 4 years.
The first task facing the extremely young pharaoh was to reintroduce the cult of Amun.
This land was plagued by evil. The sanctuary of the gods was falling into ruins. I have prayed the gods and the goddesses to help me, but they have not listened to me. I have worked constantly to regain their favor. When I arrived, I found their temples destroyed, the sacred places profaned, and the courtyards covered with weeds. I have rebuilt their sanctuaries, I have renovated the temples, and I have rendered them many very precious gifts. I have created the statues of the gods in gold, and have inlaid them with lapis lazuli and many precious stones.
The reintroduction of the cult of Amun was a very important decision that Tutankhamun could not take on his own.
After Akhenaten died and the court returned to Thebes, the cult of Amun-Re again became extremely powerful.
The very young age of Tutankhamun permitted the priests of Amun to exercise their influence on him and to reappropriate that power that had been taken away from them by Akhenaten. This restoration was followed by the return to Thebes as the religious capital of the realm. In the great temple complex of Amun-Ra at Karnak, he had built the Grand Avenue flanked by sphinxes with ram's heads, which connected the temple of Amun with that of Mut, his divine wife. In addition, he reintroduced the antique feast of Opet, that was the most solemn celebration of the devotion to the Theban triad, formed by Amun, Mut, and Khonsu. At Luxor, instead, he had erected a statue of himself with his own wife, later credited to Ramses II. However, it is not far from the statue that the activity of Tutankhamun in public works reached its climax.
We're standing in the processional colonnade of the Luxor Temple, which had been begun under Amenhotep III and then abandoned under Akhenaten. This stands as testimony to Tutankhamun's devotion to Amun-Re as he completed much of its beautiful decoration.
In spite of his great fame, Tutankhamun created very little. His reign lasted only 10 years. He died before he was 20. His was a sudden death and took all by surprise, including those who were working on the construction of his tomb. The place for his eternal sleep, in fact, was still not ready when the boy king died, and his embalmed body was hastily placed in another resting place, not worthy of welcoming a king. In fact, it is a rather small burial place, formed by a short corridor which leads to an antechamber in front of a small area called Annex, in which were conserved the objects and the food of which the pharaoh would have need in the netherworld. From the antechamber, the burial chamber and the small treasury are reachable. Overall, the tomb is of modest dimensions, not much more than 100 square meters, but it is one of the most fascinating and important places associated with Egyptian history. The fame of Tutankhamun, in fact, really results from the discovery of his tomb, the only one found not violated in the Valley of the Kings, thanks to the tenacity and the intuition of Howard Carter. From 1907, Carter excavated in the Valley of the Kings, financed by George Edward Herbert, Earl of Carnarvon, but for many years the excavations had not produced the expected results.
Only after years of research, finally on the 4th of November 1922, the English archaeologist found what he was looking for.
And this day, Carter came to the site and he found all the workmen silent, no talking. And the foreman of the workmen came to him and told him, "We found something you should see." And he came with him to this site and to this place, and he showed him the first step to this tomb. And that time, Carter did not know that he would find the tomb of Tutankhamun, but he was sure that he found something so important finally in the Valley of the Kings. So he began to follow the steps down to the tomb. After he finished the cleaning of this staircase, he came to this entrance and he found that it is plastered and it has the seals of the necropolis of the Valley of the Kings. In that time, according to James Henry Breasted, Carter called him to read together the name which in these seals impressions, and they found that this is the seals with the cartouches of Tutankhamun. So he began to recognize that this is the tomb of Tutankhamun. But he found also two seals. Seemed that the tomb was opened after the period of Tutankhamun. So he had some doubts that the tomb was wrapped in antiquity. So, these two seals in this sealed door gave him some doubts about if the tomb was intact or no. But he continued to excavate and he sent to Lord Carnarvon to come to join him in this discovery. So Lord Carnarvon came until he finished this corridor and reached to the other entrance. Until he came here, all this entrance was closed and sealed also with the names of Tutankhamun. And here in this spot, Lord Carnarvon joined him. And they began to break down these seals or this door to see what's inside it. And Carter light a candle to see what's inside. And Lord Carnarvon asked him, "What do you see? What do you see?" And he said, "I see the glimpse of the gold inside this tomb." It means that the tomb was intact in that time when they first saw it. And he found also with Lord Carnarvon for the first time that the tomb is full of objects, thousands and thousands of objects. The tomb was stuck with objects. So it was a great moment for them. This what they said together is now in every book of Egyptology, because this was a great moment for the history of Egyptology, and also it was the first time they found an intact tomb in the Valley of the Kings. When Carter finished opening the doorway of this chamber or antechamber, he found that this room is stuck of thousands and thousands of objects. Most of them are gilded and made of precious and semi-precious stones, and everything was arranged and was wrapped very well, preparing to accompany the king in his journey in the afterlife. In 1927, they began to work toward the west until they reached here. A big wall was here. There was a big wall, and there was an entrance sealed with the cartouches of Tutankhamun.
Carter had arrived at a crucial point. The antechamber was practically cleared, and he was now able to break down the wall that still separated him from the burial chamber, where he hoped to find the mummy of the pharaoh still intact.
With extreme care, I broke down the plaster and began to pull out the small stones that formed the upper layer of the wall. The desire to stop and glance inside was irresistible, and when after about 10 minutes the hole was large enough to look inside, I inserted an electric torch. Its light revealed to me an astounding spectacle.
The 20 people who were in the tomb with Carter asked him if he could see anything, and the archaeologist replied, yes, wonderful things.
At about a meter from the door, stretched in every direction, enough to block the entrance of the chamber, was erected what was a wall of solid gold.
He found the glimpse of the gold shining in his face because the shrines, the wooden gilded shrines which was covering the sarcophagus of the king, was just behind or beyond this wall, and they began to lift the shrines, 6 shrines systematically, step by step, until they reached this beautiful quartzite sarcophagus. And after that, it took time from him to find the scaffolds to lift the lid of the sarcophagus. Once he lifted the lid of the sarcophagus, he began to find the outer sarcophagus, which was made of solid gold. Then after he opened it, he found another sarcophagus there, which was made of gilded wood with gilded gold. And when he lifted, he faced the mummy itself.
In spite of the reduced dimensions, the tomb conserves representations which have much to tell.
Look from the beginning. You can see the funeral. They're bringing the mummy of Tutankhamun in a shrine. And they are bringing the mummy to the tomb. And after that, you have the high priest, who became the king of Egypt, opening the mouth of Tutankhamun as Osiris, telling him, I open your mouth, then you can eat. I open your eyes, then you can see. I open your nose, then you can smell in the afterlife, and you become a king. And after that, you have seen of Tutankhamun with goddesses, especially Hathor, the goddess of beauty and love, and Osiris. Look, they're holding him with love and affection. Osiris telling him, come to my kingdom. You become one of us. You became a god. And Hathor, as Isis, his mother, is holding him with love. And another one scene and 1 hour from the book of the Imidwat, what is in the netherworld. Then we see Anubis is also blessing Tutankhamun. Very little scenes, but very important, can show to us that Osiris accepted King Tut, who's resting under the golden coffins, to live for eternity.
The news of the discovery went rapidly round the world and was made even more sensational by a presumed curse which seemed to strike those who had participated in it. It seems, in fact, that in the burial chamber was found an earthenware tablet that later disappeared, with an explicit and worrying inscription.
The wings of death will strike whoever disturbs the sleep of the pharaoh.
The news items at the time reported different versions of the curse, but all were in agreement in blaming any unfortunate event on the anger of the pharaoh, whose eternal sleep had been disturbed after almost 33 centuries. What gave birth to the legend was the unfortunate sudden death of Lord Carnarvon a few months after the discovery. In the following years, different accidents happened to some of the people associated, even indirectly, with those who took part in opening the tomb. For this reason, many newspapers realized that the curse was more fascinating news than the discovery itself, and contributed to fostering it by collecting every rumor. Still today, the curse continues to make news.
They took the mummy and I put it inside the CAT scan machine. What's amazing, after I put the body of King Tut inside the CAT scan machine, the machine was stopped. They began to think there is something could be called the curse of the pharaohs, or the curse of Tutankhamun. Why the machine stopped?
In spite of the fact that the tomb was of limited size, 5,398 gold and silver objects were packed into it. The greatest treasure ever discovered.
These beautiful artifacts at the Cairo Museum capture the hearts of everyone. Each artifact can tell us the story, his diet. He loved beer. We had many jars of beers. He was interested in eating. We had many evidence about the food and the diet that he ate. The tomb can teach us a lot really about this golden boy. Ruled for a short period of time, but it was the time of the golden age.
Tens of finely worked alabaster vases and animals were recovered. The treasury, for the most part, was occupied by a gold reliquary that was protecting the 4 canopic jars in alabaster containing the internal organs of the young pharaoh. 3 splendid funeral bedheads in gilded wood occupied an entire wall of the antechamber, where over 700 objects were recovered. Among these, a splendid golden throne with one of the most rare representations of Tutankhamun with his principal wife, Ankhesenamun. The royal couple is represented in a moment of great intimacy, with the wife who spreads a perfumed ointment on the sovereign's body. The 2 young people are represented with only one sandal on their feet, a demonstration of the eternal love that they had sworn, both in good times, represented by the foot with the sandal, and in bad, referring to the barefoot.
We have a very small shrine, gilded shrine. That shrine is covered with wonderful and beautiful scenes of Tutankhamun and his young wife in different poses. So these objects we have here are showing us that both were really in love, in spite of the fact that they were very, very young when they got married.
Tutankhamun married Ankhesenamun shortly before being crowned at only 9 years of age, and with the passing of the years, their love became great.
They were in love. Everything in the tomb can show this. It's shown in the objects. The throne, go to the Cairo Museum, and you look at her, she's leaning on him, touching. When he died, she put that flower. And we know he had no children, actually. The only evidence that we have is the fetus that shows that maybe he had 2 fetus. They were born, died like this. And we are hoping that we will take some samples for DNA between them and Tutankhamun to find out the relationship between them and King Tut.
But of all the objects recovered in the tomb, absolutely the most precious were recovered in the burial chamber. The body of the pharaoh was protected by 4 shrines in gilded wood, one inside the other. Inside them, a large sarcophagus in quartzite contained another 3 sarcophagi, the first 2 also in gilded wood, and the third in pure gold.
The lid was raised using the gilded handles, and the mummy of the pharaoh appeared. More than 3,000 years had passed since human eyes had looked upon the inside of that coffin of solid gold, and time, in proportion to the brevity of human life, seemed to lose any common perspective. Before our eyes, finally, was laying all that remained of the young pharaoh, who up until now, for us, had only been the shadow of a name.
The face of the mummy was protected by a wonderful pure gold mask that reproposed the physiognomy of the pharaoh.
The most beautiful object on earth, the golden mask, that I can feel it's talking. I can feel when I look at it, the face and the eyes as if it's alive.
On the back of the mask, a verse of the text of the sarcophagi was engraved that that had to accompany the journey of the pharaoh in the afterlife.
Hail to you, you who are kindly of countenance, owner of eyes which see, whom Anubis knit together, whom Ta-Sokar exalted, to whom Shu gave the supports, kindly of countenance among the gods, whom Re gave to Osiris for the secret thing which was done against him in order to end the injury by Seth against him. May you make him to be a spirit. May you subdue his foes for him. May you guide him to the fair places of the realm of the dead. May you smite the confederacy of Seth for him. That I be one who is enduring. Enduring is what has been commanded, even enduring like Re forever.
To remove the mask from the face of the pharaoh was not an easy task, and Carter became aware of this very quickly.
He tried to take the mask out. He couldn't, because the mask was completely tied on the body of the mummy. He had to take the mummy out from the tomb, put it under the sun. It never melted. He could not take the mask out. Then he took the mummy inside the tomb of Seti II, and they brought tools with fire, and they took the golden mask out, and this is how Howard Carter damaged the mummy completely to 18 pieces.
The activities of Carter and the following studies on it have left the mummy in a disastrous state. In recent years, many steps have been taken in order to safeguard its state of conservation.
I looked at the body, I said, I have to save this man. I have to save this golden boy, because the breathing of the people who enter inside and the dust can damage the mummy more. And that's why I came in November 4th of 2007, the same day that the tomb was found 85 years ago. You cannot believe. The valley was full of hundreds of reporters from everywhere. The golden boy attracted everyone. And we designed this showcase in Germany, and I took the mummy from the sarcophagus and I put it here. The only good thing that people can see, they can see the face and the feet. And underneath, you can see they control humidity and heat. Then we can save this mummy for millions of years.
The examinations have given surprising results, above all regarding one of the more obscure mysteries relating to the figure of Tutankhamun, the real cause of his sudden death. For decades, the most accredited theory was that of homicide. But today, the analyses carried out by the Supreme Council of Antiquities with the most advanced technological means have demonstrated that he died as the result of a simple accident.
We discovered that he was not killed as the people thought in the last half or maybe in the last century. People thought that he was killed because after some investigations at that time, they found a kind of a wound in his skull, but this doesn't cause any death.
We found that he was not murdered. Because that hole in the back of the head, the CAT scan machine showed that was made in Dynasty 18 by the pharaohs who made the mummification to put the liquid inside the body. And I brought the mummy back and I did announce that King Tut died in an accident because we found a fracture in the left leg. And that fracture was an accident happened to the golden boy one day before he died. But what kind of an accident? No one really can know anything about that.
Yet up until that moment, it was thought that the circumstances of his death were very different. In 1968, the mummy was examined with X-rays. The results showed some suspicious stains at the height of the head. It was in this way that the theories of a plot and homicide took shape.
There have been a number of theories as to how Tutankhamun died. One of the most popular was that he was killed by a blow to the back of the head. This was based mainly on a rather fuzzy X-ray that was taken a while ago. And from this fuzzy X-ray was built up a theory about how he was murdered, possibly by one of his advisors, Ai, or another of his advisors, Horemheb.
Why in particular were Ai and Horemheb the principal suspects of this crime? Who were these two men? Ai, who according to some theories was the father of Nefertiti, was responsible for important duties during the reign of Akhenaten and was a member of the Regency Council that governed Egypt before Tutankhamun became pharaoh. The works of the construction of his tomb were initiated at Tel El Amarna, but were never concluded because with the death of the young king, the situation changed. Ankhesenamun did not want to marry any of the pretenders to the throne. She wrote to the king of the Hittites,
"My husband is dead, and I have been told that you have sons of adult age. Send me one of them, and I will make him my consort, and he will reign over Egypt."
The Hittite sovereign consented and sent to the queen one of his sons. The prince, however, never arrived at the court of Thebes. He was killed during his journey towards Egypt by some assassins sent, perhaps by Ai. According to some theories, Ankhesenamun married the old pretender. According to others, she did not, and nothing further is known of her. The only certainty is that Ai, even though he was not of royal blood, became the 11th pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. At 70 years of age, he succeeded in this way in satisfying his greatest ambition. Ai built himself a splendid tomb in the Valley of the Kings, the KV-23, where he was buried on his death, only 4 years after his access to the throne. His successor was Horemheb, who, like Ai, became pharaoh while not being of royal blood. He was a general and one of the most important men at the time of the end of the 18th dynasty. He participated in the Regency Council that elected the boy Tutankhamun to be pharaoh and was one of those that struggled for power at the death of the same. Also for Horemheb, 2 tombs are conserved. Before he became king, he had already started the construction of a magnificent tomb in the ancient necropolis of Saqqara.
Horemheb prepared for him a tomb in Saqqara, in Memphis necropolis. Tomb which became bigger and bigger with courtyards, with new pylons. When he became a king, he had to make a choice. This tomb couldn't work well for the new king because the kings were buried in the Valley of the Kings, in Thebes, in Luxor. So Ai, when he became king, prepared for him a tomb in Thebes. By the way, Ai had maybe a tomb in Saqqara also, still to be discovered. And Horemheb, it's the same. He made a beautiful tomb for him in the Valley of the Kings.
The tomb of Horemheb in the Valley of the Kings, denominated KV-57, seems to be unfinished. The walls of the funeral chamber, in fact, are decorated with scenes in relief left in various stages of completion. However, they are very useful in understanding the process which the artists employed to obtain this type of decoration. Overall, the tomb of Horemheb is one of the largest in all the Valley of the Kings, and it is really twice the size of that of his predecessor Ai, the scheming courtier who became pharaoh on the death of Tutankhamun. But really, the tomb of Ai hides another further mystery. In fact, it seems it was originally designed for Tutankhamun, but on the sudden death of the young pharaoh, the ancient vizier would have buried him in the tomb destined for himself, because it was now finished. By sheer chance, it was exactly this tomb, the KV62, which remained not violated for over 3,200 years. If there had not been a similar set of circumstances, today, perhaps it would not be Tutankhamun, the most famous pharaoh in history. And it would not be his mummy, recently exposed in a glass showcase in the most famous tomb in the world. Today, it is possible to admire the face of the young pharaoh, a face that, in spite of everything, still hides many secrets.
Soon we'll compare the DNA of the golden boy with the skeleton of Akhenaten, and we'll be able to discover the other family of Tutankhamun. The golden boy will never stop his mystery, but I always say that the mystery and the magic of Tutankhamun will never end. It will continue.
The mystery of the life of Tutankhamun still escapes us. The shadows move, but the darkness never clears completely.